Daniel Carter, the powerful CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, was used to overlooking the details most people missed. But that evening, as he wrapped up a dinner meeting in the sleek executive cafeteria, something unusual caught his eye. Through the glass wall, he noticed Luis, the quiet, elderly janitor, methodically gathering untouched food from the trays into a worn plastic bag. It wasn't random or rushed. There was care in every motion, as if this task held great meaning for him. Daniel, a man constantly surrounded by luxury and efficiency, felt a strange pull. Normally, he might have ignored such a sight, chalked it up to someone simply saving leftovers. But something about Luis, his hunched frame, the gentle way he moved, the way he looked around to make sure no one noticed, stirred a curiosity that Daniel hadn't felt in years. It was a rare moment when the noise of business faded, and something human and real took its place. Instead of returning to his suite or calling it a night, Daniel stood up. He followed Luis at a distance, slipping quietly into the elevator just before the doors closed. It wasn't about suspicion. It was a feeling, an instinct, that whatever Luis was doing wasn't for himself. Daniel didn't know where the janitor was going or why, but for once, he wasn't the one in control. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he needed to know the story behind that simple act of kindness. Rain poured down as Daniel Carter trailed behind Luis through the dim, glistening streets of the city. He clutched a borrowed umbrella, the polished CEO now stripped of his usual entourage, his tailored shoes soaked from puddles he would have normally never stepped near. Luis moved with quiet purpose, weaving through alleys and backstreets that Daniel had only ever seen through tinted car windows. Eventually, Luis stopped at a crumbling building tucked between forgotten warehouses. The door creaked open, and Daniel watched from the shadows. Inside, a flickering light revealed a modest shelter, no signs, no fanfare, just worn mats and tired faces. And then, life. Children ran to Luis, their eyes lighting up. He greeted them with warmth and gently unpacked the food, setting it out carefully like a sacred offering. It wasn't the first time. This was a routine, a promise fulfilled. Leftovers from the wealthy were now a feast for the forgotten. Daniel stood frozen, water dripping from his umbrella, as a powerful realization settled over him. The man he had walked past every day, the janitor he barely noticed, was a hero to these children. No headlines, no praise. Just quiet, consistent love. In that moment, Daniel understood something money had never taught him: greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it walks alone in the rain, carrying hope in a plastic bag. Daniel stepped into the shelter, unsure of his place in a world so different from the polished corridors he ruled. The air inside was warm but heavy, with stories, with survival. He shook off the rain, glancing around at the worn walls and the kids huddled with paper plates in hand. Luis looked up, unsurprised. There was no fear in his eyes, only quiet acceptance. "Didn't think anyone saw," he said, offering Daniel a seat on an old wooden bench. They sat in silence for a moment before Luis began to speak, not with bitterness, but with truth. He told Daniel how he once slept on these same floors, lost everything after a series of bad breaks, and watched the system fail not just him, but many. When he got back on his feet, he promised himself he'd never forget. He took the janitor job not out of necessity, but opportunity, access to untouched meals and a way to serve those still struggling. Luis looked at Daniel and said, "Leftovers are only leftovers to those who have enough." The words hit harder than any boardroom debate or quarterly report. Daniel had built empires, chased profits, and sat at elite tables, yet had never felt the richness of what Luis just showed him. In that moment, Daniel didn't see a janitor. He saw a man of quiet honor, someone who had turned pain into purpose. And for the first time in a long time, the CEO found himself humbled, and changed. The next morning, the atmosphere in the sleek corporate boardroom was tense with curiosity. Daniel Carter, usually composed and strategic, stood at the head of the table with an unusual fire in his eyes. His senior executives leaned in as he laid out a bold new vision, the Luis Project. It wasn't about innovation in tech, but innovation in compassion. He explained how the company would begin collecting surplus food from its offices and partner locations to distribute to shelters across the city. A new foundation would be launched, focused on funding local shelters and creating job opportunities for the homeless. The goal, not just charity, but dignity and change. Murmurs spread around the room. A few executives scoffed, questioning the relevance to the company's brand. Daniel's voice cut through the noise. We're not just in the business of tech. We're in the business of humanity. Silence followed. No one argued after that. Then, he dropped the biggest surprise: Luis would be the director of the program. The humble janitor who had fed children with leftovers would now lead a mission that could change thousands of lives. Cameras from the internal media team clicked, eager for a good PR moment. But when Luis was brought in, he waved off the attention. No speeches, he said with a soft smile. Just make sure no kid sleeps hungry. And with that, the company shifted, not just in operations, but in heart. The most important project they'd ever launched wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. 1 year later, the atmosphere was joyful at the grand opening of a new shelter, bright murals on the walls, warm food on every table, and the sound of children's laughter filling the air. Volunteers moved with purpose, and music played gently in the background. At the entrance stood a bronze plaque, in honor of those who give without being seen. Daniel Carter, once a man of suits and spreadsheets, stood quietly among the crowd, not as a CEO, but as a witness to something greater. His eyes followed Luis, now dressed in simple clothes, kneeling to help a young boy tie his shoelaces with the same gentle care Daniel had seen that rainy night. A news reporter approached Daniel with a microphone, curious about the company's dramatic shift over the past year. "What inspired all this?" she asked. Daniel looked across the yard, where Luis was now handing a sandwich to a shy little girl. A soft smile crossed Daniel's face. "Sometimes the people at the bottom," he said, "teach you how to rise the right way." There was no press conference, no red carpet, no speech from Luis. When the cameras turned away, he simply returned to the crowd, guiding, serving, loving. Still invisible to most. Still giving, without needing to be seen. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the shelter, it was clear, this wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a legacy built on quiet kindness and the power of truly seeing one another.